Welcome to Just Healing, where we rediscover humanity and our conversations around trauma and celebrate all the unique ways we love and heal. I'm one of your Season 2 co-hosts, Michael Munson. Trauma doesn't exist in a bubble, and healing shouldn't either. Let's listen, let's learn, let's heal.
I've done thousands of these medical forensic exams. Maybe approximately 10% are male. I think that has a lot to do with culture, society. Statistics say it's a lot more likely to happen to a female. Statistics are based on people who come forward. We know males are less likely to come forward. It's an unfair burden that we put on male patients. When someone tells you something, why don't you approach it from the perspective as they're telling you the truth? Start by believing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of Just Healing. I'm Michael Munson, one of your Season 2 co-hosts. I'm really excited that we're here today with Karen Carroll, who's a forensic nurse and works with the International Association of Forensic Nurses. So welcome, Karen. I'm glad that you're here with us today. And I'm wondering if we could just start by you sharing a little bit about who you are and we can say how we know each other. We've known each other for a while, I know, and we've had some spunky interactions in the work that we've done. But I would love to hear directly from you so you can share with people who you are.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. And this is a very important topic that we're going to be talking about today. But like you said, I am a forensic nurse, which means I'm a registered nurse by profession for almost 50 years. And I've been trained as a sexual assault nurse examiner. But I've been doing this for like the last 28 plus years. A forensic nurse is a registered nurse that's been specially trained to provide comprehensive but trauma-informed care to patients who have either been victims of violence or who have experienced violence or been affected by violence across the lifespan, meaning from birth to death. And those of us who are sexual assault nurse examiners had specialized training so that we respond when a person presents to a hospital stating they've been raped or sexually assaulted. We respond, we introduce ourselves, we provide the patient with all their options and choices for care, and then based on what the patient wants, that's how we proceed. But I think the most important aspect of our job is we begin to get control over what's going to happen back to that patient. Because when someone's raped or sexually assaulted, their body's been touched without their permission. Hospitals and healthcare facilities can be very intimidating, and there's a presumed level of power that we as healthcare providers have. And so my job is to let that patient know I am here for you. I've been specially trained to offer you options for care. My job is to explain everything that could possibly happen, and then your job is to let me know what it is you want, and then my job again is to respect that decision. So I'm never there to talk a patient into or out of something, just to let them know here are your choices and what is it you'd like to do.
I'm so glad that you started with that, because I think that that's one of the myths that people have of like, oh, I'm going to go get care after I've been assaulted, and oh my God, they're going to make me do all these things. And what you've just said is like, no, your job is to offer the range of possibilities, and then that survivor can decide, yep, nope, I'm going to change my mind. I'm in control here. So that's a perfect way to frame our discussion today.
And I think it's also important to mention that you would call this person a survivor. I, on the other hand, must refer to them as a patient, because first of all, I'm a healthcare provider. And second of all, I need to be totally objective, because the word forensic is in my title. And forensic literally means pertaining to the law. So I am, as a healthcare provider, is sort of a bridge between the healthcare system and the criminal justice system, meaning that I provide healthcare, that I try to sort of limit the short and long-term outcomes of the patient's experience. But in the course of what I do, often a lot of what I do has forensic purposes, meaning it could be a component or a part of an investigation. But I don't work for law enforcement. I don't work for a district attorney's office. I don't work for a defense attorney. When I'm in that hospital providing that care, I'm a healthcare provider with the understanding that what I do could possibly be used in a court of law.
That's great distinction. And, and you bring up the point too of like, we might use different language, right? I mean, I tend to talk about survivors, or people like that. And you're going to talk about people as patients. And we're talking about the same person, just in different roles.
Correct. Because we have different agendas and there are different things that we're there to do. And by me being objective and documenting things objectively, then if I'm called to go to court, it is not presumed that I have already decided what's happened. That being said, as a nurse, I believe what my patients tell me because it is never my job to prove whether a crime has occurred or not. But if I believe what my patient tells me, then that will dictate and help me plan for what options of care I'm going to offer.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I mean, you have to walk the finer line, and the person that's in the office with you who has survived trauma, all they have to do is show up and give their consent or not give their consent. And I'm glad you mentioned too that you're not involved with law enforcement, right? You may involve law enforcement later on if that's what that patient or survivor wants, but you're not inherently linked to law enforcement, which I think is a concern for some people.
Patients come to care that I would provide. They may come to me in all different circumstances. They may come in because they've already spoken to law enforcement. They may present with a family member. They may present with maybe an agency or staff of a place in their living arrangements. But the moment we go in the room, I close the door and we have a conversation, it's important that they know that they are in charge, regardless of what they were told by people who brought them into us. I mean, I've often seen patients who were told, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to collect evidence, we have to do this. And my first thing I say to my patients is, you don't have to do anything. Here's what your choices are. You tell me what you want to do, and I will respect that.
And that is fantastic. And I think that's something that people just don't understand. And, the people that are listening to this podcast might be survivors themselves. They might be friends and family. They may be community allies. I mean, there's a wide range of people that are listening to this, and we all have certain beliefs about what you do as your role. And a lot of the times we're not right about that, so I mean, I think that the more you share with us, the more it's like, oh yeah, this doesn't have to be a big scary thing. Yeah, I don't have to get undressed. I don't have to have evidence collected.
Correct. You don't have to do anything. And while there are multiple programs on television, things that are on social media, there's often a misperception that the forensic nurse is there to collect evidence. That is just a fraction of what I can offer the patient. And I am expert at it. I mean, I know how to do it in such a way that it will be useful on the line if necessary, but that's just such a small component of what I do. I think I do more talking, listening, and teaching in that room than anything else. And that's what patients need. For anyone listening who's ever been to a hospital emergency department, you're told, there's your room, go into the bathroom, change your clothes, pee in the cup, blah, 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 all these different things. And while I may need you to put on a hospital gown to assist me in examining you, I'm not going to tell you have to. I'm going to say to you, I'd like you to put on this gown. Here's why I need you to put it on. And if you decide you don't want to put on a hospital gown, then you don't put on a hospital gown. I mean, I know that's a very simple explanation. I may need a urine specimen from you, but rather than say, go in here, do this, this is what I need, this is why I need it, and this is what will happen to it, is a better, more trauma-informed, patient-centered way to explain what's going to happen. And my exam could take as short as 2 hours or up to 8 hours. It really depends on the situation, and I go at the speed of the patient. That patient is in total control in that room.
And that kind of leads into, men and masculine identified survivors are often, not in the know of what happens, just like everybody else. And there can be some additional barriers. I mean, we live in a culture where we say men are not sexually assaulted. And a lot of people believe that. And so when that belief happens, a lot of times people say, like, I don't deserve to get care, or are they going to accept me? Are they going to turn me away if I go to seek care? What are some of the things that you tend to see, or what are some of the barriers that you've perceived around men or masculine identified folks who may want to get care, who don't know if they should get care? Like, that whole process of getting to you.
Unfortunately, the first thing that stands out for me is I've done thousands of these medical forensic exams, which is what we call the examination that we would provide for this patient. And of the thousands, I would guesstimate that maybe approximately 10% are male. And I think that has a lot to do with culture, society. When you're raped or sexually assaulted, your body is touched in a particular way without your permission. And it is presumed, society wise, that men are strong, they're virile, they should be able to prevent anyone from harming them, or they're always in charge. And there are so many subtle ways that people become victims of this type of a crime. And so, as healthcare providers, we're even less prepared to deal with a male patient because we don't necessarily expect to see one. And so, even when I teach new forensic nurses how to do these exams, they're concerned, well, what about men? And what do I do with the male? And, I just say, first of all, relax. They're a patient just like any other patient. You're going to talk to them the same way you would, and you're going to do it in such a way that you're not judging them. They shouldn't think that you're blaming them because, trust me, these are things that these patients are already doing for themselves. So how do I see males typically present? It's just like there are multiple ways females can present, multiple ways males can present. Very young, because I do children, very young children are often being touched by relatives or caregivers or people they know and trust. And their body is touched in inappropriate ways, both male and female. Now, statistics say it's a lot more likely to happen to a female, but I can't say that I think that's really true because statistics are based on people who come forward. And since we know males are less likely to come forward because of these societal constructs, then I can't really say that we know exactly how many males are being victimized. But I've had my male patients tell me that they thought this person cared for them, they trusted this person, and this person that they're referring to could be another male or another female, and that they were forced to do things that they didn't want to do. They may have said no or behaved in a way that any reasonable person would know they weren't consenting, and yet still, things happened that they just couldn't control. Male patients are more likely to have multiple perpetrators, and their physical injuries or findings are more likely to be present. There is a belief that if you are raped or sexually assaulted, you're going to have injuries, you're going to have bruises or tears or swelling or bleeding. And that's not what we find to be true for most patients, and especially most female patients. But that also is likely to be true for most male patients. But what we do know is when males do disclose being assaulted, they're more likely to disclose multiple perpetrators. And so there is a higher increase sometimes for the likelihood of an injury. I've had my male patients question their masculinity for various reasons. Often patients I see, male or female, blame themselves for what has happened. And I have to explain to the patient that you're not in control of another person's behavior. And so my patients might say, males as much as female, well, what did I do to cause this other person to think it would be okay to touch me in that way? And so a female might be more likely to say that out loud than a male might be. And so I have to always keep in mind that whatever patient I'm dealing with, let them know that this was not their fault. And that, they're allowed to be in a private situation with another person. They're allowed to agree to certain types of contact, but the moment they don't want a particular type of contact to happen and the other person proceeds, it's the other person that's done the bad thing, not the patient. And my male patients are a lot less likely to talk about that. They're more likely to think that they might be gay or homosexual. And for some heterosexual males, that's a major concern, that they don't want to be perceived as being gay or homosexual. And a big thing that we don't really think about or talk about is there is a lot of shame, embarrassment, and guilt. But with male patients, it may be more pronounced because their body may physiologically react in certain ways that makes them think that the assault was their fault. For example, it's possible for them to have certain feelings. The contact may even emit feelings of pleasure. even though the contact was not wanted. It might feel good on some level. So imagine the guilt and the shame with that. There may be physiological changes in their body where they may notice certain body parts are reacting the way they would react with consensual activity, even though this incident is not consensual. Again, that puts into my patient's head that it was my fault. And so what I always try to somehow weave into my conversation or my teaching of the patient is explaining to them based on science that when your body is touched in a certain way, certain things may happen. And it's more of a reflex. It doesn't mean you wanted the contact. The only real thing that can indicate if you want contact is your mouth saying yes or no. But it's almost like your body is kind of betraying you because you don't want to be there. You're traumatized. You may even be scared for your life. And yet you might experience a change in a certain part of your body that would happen in a situation where you wanted to be in. And so we have to have those conversations often with male patients.
And I think for a lot of men, that's just really confusing. I mean, it's just like, why did this happen? Why is my body doing this? It's just it's an easy to understand question that a lot of men feel. And yeah, I mean, your job is to help kind of say, hey, this is a normal physiological response. It happens. It doesn't mean that you wanted this to happen.
I try to normalize it with my patients because if we base it on science and take away the emotions and the feelings and let them understand that certain things are going to happen when your body is touched, whether you want the touch or not. And I kind of compare it to, I'll say to my patients, like, for example, have you ever been in a restaurant out to dinner, stuffed, full, you're not hungry anymore, and you're getting ready to leave, and the people at the table next to you, they serve their food, and you look at it, and all of a sudden you begin to salivate, and it's just like you're reacting instinctively to what you're seeing or what you're experiencing, like smelling the food, but it doesn't mean you're hungry. And so when your body's touched in a certain way and it reacts, it's because of the physical contact, not what's going on in your mind and in your head and in your, in your thought processes.
That's a great example.
I think people can kind of relate to that, but linking it back to, it has nothing to do with your sexual preference. It has nothing to do with you wanting the contact. It has everything to do with what happens when there is what we call tactile touch. And so it's important. And since my patients might not bring it up, I have to be very careful how I introduce the subject. So I might say something like, other male patients I've taken care of have said XYZ has happened, or they've noticed that their body did XYZ. So if something like that happened to you, I just want to make sure you understand that it didn't mean you wanted the contact. It has nothing to do with your preference for who you love or who you're attracted to. It has nothing to do with anything up here, more to do with reflex and how your body just reacts to being touched.
And I think, you and I have had conversations about this before, but people, guessing if they're gay or wondering if they're gay is such a societal construct too. It's like, we kind of stigmatize, people that are gay, even in this year, which is, we shouldn't be stigmatizing that, but for people to be questioning in that, it's like, there's nothing wrong with being gay. But it's hard to say there's nothing wrong with being gay and this didn't make you gay or straight. And just that cognitive dissonance around, should I be feeling shame about this or not? Or, it's hard.
It's so important that we as healthcare providers understand that and recognize that we have to be able to verbalize what we need to tell these patients in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're being judged. And if they have a concern, well, does that mean I'm gay? So it doesn't mean you are. It doesn't mean you aren't. What makes you gay is how you feel. It's from within you.
Exactly. Right.
And making sure that they understand that. And it's an uncomfortable topic. I can tell you that, I don't know if you remember that years ago, there was a major lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was able, as a forensic nurse, to work with some of these male survivors because we help them complete applications for these lawsuits. And I must have spoken to over 50 men. And often they would say things or describe things that happened to their body. And I would then do what I would do with any other male patient, is explain how this is a reflex, how it was a body reaction, how you couldn't necessarily control it. And I'd have men in tears saying, no one ever told me that. And for years, I thought it was my fault. And for years, blah, blah, blah. And it's just so sad. So as healthcare providers, we've got to be comfortable talking about this, because if we don't, I think we're providing a disservice to our patients, because, and it may not have happened to them, and they may not want to admit that it's happened to them, but they can still hear that it was not.
Yes. Right. And I think that, one of our jobs, and I'm in a very different role than you are, but like when we know things as providers, as people that are working with survivors or patients, we can help other people know those things so that they can share that with other people, right? So like, even if it's not important to that person that you're working with, it goes in their head. And if somebody discloses to them, they can say, hey, you know what? That's normal. That's a normal response. So to me, it's like, it's the education that just kind of ripples out when we can talk about it.
Hopefully someone who's listening may not be a survivor, but may know someone who is, or may
Right.
come to in the future know someone who is a survivor, because often family, friends, the community that we're around, if they don't understand, they can unintentionally say things that just, I think, enhances that guilt and that shame. And what do you mean your body did that? Are you telling me you wanted this to
Right.
happen? Not understanding, um, and it's just not something that we talk about. And so if we don't talk about it, then let's continue, and we don't know how to help each other. So I think it's an important discussion to have.
And that's exactly true. And it's like, when we have those misconceptions about women who have experienced sexual assault, and that's more talked about than men or masculine folks that are sexually assaulted. I mean, it just compounds that shame and that stigma for men, because it's like, we don't talk about this. We really don't talk about it when it's men, and just that snowball effect when we don't have conversations. So
The also belief that men cannot be raped because society presumes that you're a man, you're strong, and you're able to protect yourself. And what we have learned, and it's taken years, but that when you're in a traumatic situation, that trauma has an effect on the brain. People have heard the expression fight or flight. People have heard that. And they know that what that expression means, well, if you're in a situation where you're concerned for your own safety, you're either going to run away or you're going to fight back. People have also heard the expression deer in the headlights, meaning when you're in a traumatic situation, you just sort of freeze. So we know now that there are chemicals that are emitted from the brain when you're in a traumatic situation that will cause you to freeze, potentially flee if that's safe for you, or to fight back if all else fails. So there are all kinds of things. And this happens to men too. And so my male patient may have wanted to get away from that situation, but literally could not move, could not, and patients have said, I thought I was going to die. And I can't think of anything more traumatic than thinking your life is about to end. And so you may do whatever it is you perceive that you need to do to survive, or whatever it is that your body reflectively perceives needs to happen so that you can survive. And so we have to talk about that. But I think the major hurdle is just overcoming what society considers it means to be male or masculine, and how that equates with what it means to be a victim. And we have to begin to resolve the two, because I think if we didn't have these barriers, we would see a lot more male patients. And unfortunately, there are so many long-term effects that can happen from being victimized in these ways that we need to begin to work to let people know it's okay to come in. It's okay to seek medical care, first of all, for immediate medical needs, and then to get referrals for other long-term types of care. And if we can't get rid of that stigma about what it needs to be male or masculine, we're not going to see the male patients we should be seeing.
the research is different depending on whose research you look at, but a lot of men don't seek care for like 20 years after their initial assault. I mean, obviously they're not getting emergency medical care, but they may not get support of any kind or disclose to anybody for 20 years. That takes a toll, living that 20 years with what happened to them. So I'm curious if you want to share any of the kind of the medical implications for folks that don't get care, that live with that toxic stress, with all of those things.
In my training, we learned about something called ACEs. And it was a study that looked into the adverse consequences of certain types of situations that occur when you're younger. So based on things that you were exposed to in childhood could affect your health. I mean, they have related being exposed to trauma or violence in childhood with developing heart disease or high blood pressure as you get older, even diabetes. I mean, there are links to different things that happen to you and how your body then reacts in such a way that you have physical symptoms. And it may be emotional trauma, it may be emotional and physical trauma, but we do know that there are long-term effects. There have been studies done to talking with people who are, I think the term is unhoused now, but most people are familiar with the term homeless. And a lot of those people have trauma or violent situations in their past. People who have been admitted to facilities for substance use, be it drugs and or alcohol. There are histories of violence and trauma in their pasts. People who are incarcerated for whatever reasons, there are histories of violence or trauma in their past. So we know that experiencing certain things at a certain part of your life can affect you years later. And so if we can intervene at the time that the trauma occurs, provide good health care, provide non-judgmental resources and references, and encourage our patients to access those resources, then we can probably prevent a lot of those long-term effects. I don't know if I'll even be alive if they're long enough for a study to be done to show the difference between a person who has had early impact following their trauma and had resources and utilized them versus someone who hasn't. And so when we think of trauma and things that happen to people in their younger lives, it definitely affects their lives when they become much older adults. Those same men that I spoke to in that study, and I was speaking to men who were age range from 50 to 80 on the most part, and were victimized as young children, like, 7, 8, 9, 10 Cub Scouts through the early years of the Boy Scouts. I would say 80 to 90% of the men had substance use issues, be it drugs and or alcohol. A majority of them were unable to remain in school, to even graduate high school because of social and or anger issues. A lot of the men disclosed difficulties in relationships and trust. A good 50, 60% of them had been incarcerated for different reasons. The disclosures from these men did not change or did not necessarily seem worse based on the type of contact with their body. It was more that whatever they experienced as children traumatized them. And they all, the stories were just so common. And they all had the same effects. And these men were, like I said, 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old men. And they were all, so you're talking about whether their trauma happened in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s. By the time we got to the 2000s, they were all experiencing the same things. If we can recognize this as a society, I mean, look at the conversations now with mental health, right? And we know that mental health is still stigmatized. And we know that there are a lot of people who have mental health issues, but because there's a stigma in receiving care for that, they're not getting the care they need. And there's that same stigma, especially for our male patients, to even walk into a hospital and tell a total stranger that someone touched their body without their permission and they could not keep it from happening, because that's what they're thinking. How am I going to explain to them how I couldn't prevent this? And why would
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
expect that they
Yeah.
would be able to prevent it? It's just it's
Right.
an unfair
Right.
burden that we put on male patients or patients who identify as
It
male.
is.
It's an unfair burden.
Right there, totally interconnected, and I'm glad you brought up ACEs because adverse childhood experiences, I think, is just like, I won't say it's the answer to everything, but it's like it really, what happens in our childhood, whether it's sexual assault or other things, really influences what happens in our adulthood. And you mentioned, many of those things, and what I try to do in my work is, to normalize those things. It's normal. It's a normal coping strategy to drink to help your feelings when you're feeling, bad about what happened to you. You might act out. There might be a lot of ways that you behave that are coping strategies that may not be very helpful to you down the road, but that's what you do to try to cope with the trauma when you don't have other support that can help you more constructively, deal with what's happening. So,
People need to do what they need to do to survive.
and how do we learn? We learn from our peers. We learn from the people around us who we trust. Is there anything more you want to add about what other things you think might be helpful for more forensic nurse examiners to know about men or male survivors?
With programs on TV, and different things that people are exposed to. The word forensic has become like how they say sexy. I mean, in other words, it's like a term everybody loves and wants. And so not even all nurses who consider themselves forensic nurses are comfortable with talking about the body's reaction. I mean, the technical term for it is arousal non-concordance. We don't need the fancy word, but understanding that even though your patient is stating they didn't want this touch and this contact, and then they subsequently disclose, but their body did this, this, and this, we need to be able to understand and willing to have that conversation. We need to be comfortable in introducing ourselves the moment we enter a room. First of all, just asking permission to enter a room. I mean, when's the last time when you were in the ER, someone knocked on the door and said, "Is it okay if I come in?" They just enter or pull the
Right.
curtain and in they come.
Right.
And right away start telling you, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And we have to reframe that way to provide patient care. So we knock on the door. Is it okay for me to come in? And then I come in and then I say, is it all right for me to have a seat? Because I don't want to stand over my patient and talk at them. I want to sit down and have a conversation with them. So this tells the patient, oh, yeah, I am kind of in control here. And she's not in a rush. She has some time to listen to me. And she's asking me what it is I want. I am, like I said, from a total different generation where we weren't taught to give our pronouns. And I've had to learn that. And so I come in and I say, hi, my name is Karen, and my pronouns are she and her. And what name would you like me to refer to you as? And what are your pronouns? So, but by offering mine, that would make it hopefully a little more comfortable for the patient to give theirs. Some may not understand why I'm asking it. And then I have to explain it's because I want to refer to you the way you need to be referred. And once I get that information and I set up that relationship with the patient and make them feel comfortable, then they're more likely to access the different types of services that I can offer. We just have to understand what trauma-informed care means and practice it with all patients and assist our coworkers to begin to practice it. So we have to just, as forensic nurses, share our knowledge. The word trauma-informed sounds so technical, but it's just people skills. I mean, when you think about it, shouldn't always knock on the door before you enter a room. When you think about it, shouldn't you introduce yourself the first time you meet somebody? And if you can add on your pronouns, then that's telling that person, okay, it's safe to tell her mind, and learn and understand that while it is never your patient's job to educate you about everything, it is your job to listen and learn when your patient tells you something.
That is something that everybody can do if we practice it, beyond who's in your role. And that kind of brings us to some of the last questions that I had for you, which is like, we've talked about this a little bit already, but like, what can our families and friends and communities do, or other providers that are not forensic nurse examiners? What can we do as a community, as a village, to support and lift each other up and care about each other?
Education is key. And I don't necessarily mean going to a college or university, but learning, whether you learn on the internet, or whether you learn by attending webinars or podcasts. Try to learn what's available in your community. Maybe not be so judgmental. In the case of rape or sexual assault, and there is a tagline that's going around. I did not start this. It was started with another organization, but it just is so simple. It's 3 words. It's start by believing. And that just means when someone tells you something, why don't you approach it from the perspective as they're telling you the truth, as opposed to from the perspective of they're telling you a lie. And even if you find out later on that exactly what was said to you is not the truth, the fact that they said something to you meant they were reaching out. And so if at least you believe what they're saying until proven otherwise, then that's going to really help you plan for all the different resources you can offer. And why is that so hard? Because we don't have to prove something happened. We just have to listen, be not judgmental, and say, well, you know what? I don't know a lot about this, but here's some people who do.
And I mean, you just captured the really simple things to do, right? We can listen, we can gather resources, we can believe people, we can, share what we know, and we can just be with people. We can just be with folks that might be hurting.
And when you think about it, what really is the harm in believing what someone tells you until proven otherwise? What's really in the harm in that?
Right. There's no harm in that.
Okay, so they didn't tell me the truth, but I listened and I was there for them. Isn't that a little bit more important? I think
it is too. And they needed to tell it for a reason. So, if it wasn't true, which it likely is true, but they needed to share that. I'm wondering, as we wrap up, if there's anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't talked about. I know that you can talk forever, which I love about you. You can share more and more and more, but is there anything else that you want to add to our discussion today?
I just think that if there's anyone listening who has either been a victim of violence or some sort of interpersonal trauma, or care about someone who has, or know someone who has, to know that they're not alone, that there are people out there just willing to help, that don't be afraid to look. I mean, we use the internet for everything. I mean, we use the internet to figure out where to buy a pair of sneakers. We can use the internet to figure out where we can get help for someone that we care about. Accept that person you care about where they're at. Try not to judge them. Just listen. And try not to tell them, well, this is what you should do. And maybe phrase it as, this is what you could do. And maybe, and they may not listen the first time or the 10th time, but at least if they've come back to you the 10th time with something, they're trusting that you're going to listen to them. And so just keep listening. Don't judge. And you don't even necessarily have to fix it, but you can offer them referrals for people who maybe can help fix it, or at least help them live with it and to incorporate it into their lives.
Excellent. We've had a really good conversation. I really have enjoyed this. You and I tend to work together on advisory committees and, do those kind of stuffy things, which are really fun. But this was a really great way to to have some interaction with you about what I know you're passionate about, what I'm passionate about. So thank you very much for sharing all of the work that you've done. And, hey, you mentioned 50 years worth of work, and you got it going on. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
and I really, really appreciate you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Just Healing. Join us for new episodes throughout 2024, where we will continue to spread messages of hope and healing, and welcome Just Healing's 2 other new co-hosts, Dr. Greg Kaysen and Jace Barron. It's going to be an exciting year. And remember, you are worthy, you are loved. Trauma doesn't define any of us. Healing is possible, and it's a collective journey. This podcast was produced by Dr. Deborah and me, Michael Munson, in collaboration with Men Healing, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to helping provide accessible resources and community for any male or masculine identifying individual who has experienced sexual harm. You can donate, check out our healing events, videos, and other resources at menhealing.org. If you or someone you know has been a victim of or experienced sexual harm and you need to talk to someone, RAIN can help. Call their National Sexual Assault Hotline to speak with a trained staff member who can provide you with confidential crisis support. It's free, it's confidential, and it's available 24/7. You can call 1 800 656 4673, or you can go to their web based chat support. You can reach it at hotline.rain.org. That's HOTLINE.RAINN.org.